Say 11 years ago you were in my class? 12?
My year I graduated.
Oh, you're a senior, so it's only 10 years ago?
9, yeah. It'll be 10 years this coming year.
And here she is, and then here she, those of you that were in my intercession last year, this the upperclassmen, she kind of cool hugged in and talked about some of the work she's done in developing countries and power sources. And I thought it'd be great to have her here and speak to you today. So I think we're just going to get started here. So Alex, take it away. Oh wait, one other thing, paperwork. I'm passing around the attendance sheets, initial by your name. I've got 2 going. And if you don't see them before we leave, stop down here and we'll check that you're here. All here.
No, just go past.
Hi guys, how you doing? It's Friday. Good day. So, I want you to do me a favor for service. I want you to close your eyes. I want you to imagine a farm. A farm on which you grow, you're a farmer. So you grow some corn, you grow some beans, maybe you grow some cabbage, some carrots. Your whole farm that you and your family own, it's about an acre. It's smaller than a football field. Okay? And you live in a country where there's a wet season and a dry season. And your day, just walk you through what your day looks like in the wet season, which is the growing season. You wake up every day, you make tea, you clean your house, and you work on the farm by hand. You plant seeds, you hoe the field, pull weeds. You do that all morning. You make lunch in the middle of the day, you rest. And then you fetch fodder, feed your animals. You go get firewood a couple times a week because you got to cook with something. And you get water every day. Every day you go carry 6 jerry cans of water. That's 40 pounds that you walk back at least a mile to your house. And that's it. You make dinner, you rest, you go to bed. You can open your eyes. And that's your day. It's your whole day. It doesn't sound like there's a lot of energy in that day, but there is. It's all your energy if you're that farmer. It's all human energy. So, sit down. It's all right. Come on. Come on.
Wait. Grishma.
So, all the energy you used was physical. You walked places, you carried things, you did work. So, I got some pictures. Now that your eyes are open. There you go. So that's the life of a farmer in Tanzania, a little village that I've been to. That's what your house might look like. That's that jerry can of water you're carrying. You go probably 6 times if you're your family with mother, father, and 4 kids. You might have a cow and some chickens, that's pretty normal. And that's your work, you're doing it by hand. Now you and I don't work that way. We don't do all of that physical work, and most of the reason we don't do that physical work is that energy, the energy to do that, comes from elsewhere in our environment, right? So here, let's go to our world for a second. In our world, there's this infrastructure put in place that helps us do that. There's a grid, so I can plug my computer into the wall. There's water that comes out of the tap, right? Because there's a water distribution system. Well, you don't have cars, but most of us get places, because we're not allowed to here anymore. Is that still true, guys? Yeah. Can't have a car on campus?
You guys could?
No. Just want to make sure, right? So there are cars that run that get you places. So if you had to go to market, you go in your car most of the time. You don't have to walk. You don't have to carry your goods somewhere to sell them. They all get transported on the roads. All right? And this is a great way to get things done. This is how we get things done in this country. You and I don't have to think about a lot of the things that farmer has to think about finding fuel for a fire. You need fuel for your car to go to the gas station. Yeah. it's very different. And it's changing. Don't get me wrong, it's changing. All those people, most of those farmers, they would love to live in a house with running water and lights that turn on. So, what I'm here to talk about today a little bit is how is it changing? What does it look like? Because it doesn't quite look like this. And doing this very quickly is very hard. So I just want to talk for a second about where we get our energy, our electricity, right? Just to give you a sense, most of the electricity in this country comes from coal, comes from natural gas, nuclear, renewables, all that. And all of that is done in advanced settings. There's oil refineries, Shell, there's all this great technical stuff. But why isn't that happening so much in the developing world? Why don't we see more things? And there are places this is happening, but why don't we see these things in a lot of places around the world? To get into that, I'm going to tell you a story. This is Lake Atitlan in Guatemala, the central middle of the country. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. All right, this right down in here is the town of Panachel. So in 2005, when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, that same year there was a hurricane that hit Guatemala, Hurricane Stan. Went right through the center of the country. And in this town, it knocked out power, it took out some other things. The biggest thing it did was take out the existing sewage treatment plant. So in fact, there was infrastructure in place. There was a sewage treatment plant that served this town. It was probably a little in capacity, especially for how fast it was growing, but it was there, it worked. All right? And money from international donors, from the government, was designated to fix that plant. But it didn't happen. And it didn't happen, and for a while it didn't matter. But in 2009, so that last picture was from 2008. You can see that the lake was clear. This is the lake in 2009. Bacteria, cyanobacteria, blew throughout the whole lake. It's creating dead zones in the lake. It actually lives on top of the water, so sunlight doesn't go through, and so you don't feed the plants, and feed the animals, and all those kind of ecosystems that maybe you guys are starting to learn about. They get knocked off, and the farmers and fishermen that make their living on that lake now can't make their living. So this comes out of, and this is just one example, it's caused by government not quite being together in this country, all right? I can't tell you exactly where the money went, if someone took it, if it got misappropriated, or what happened. We don't know. But I can tell you that the problem didn't get fixed. And so this is the problem we often face in international development. As much as we would like, and we are fostering relationships with governments in the developing world, they're still figuring out how to govern. And for the people on the ground, the price can be very high as they figure that out. So the question is, in my mind, what technologies, what options are available that don't need that central infrastructure, that don't require us to have a perfect road built, really good power lines, but still make an improvement, but still empower people to live a better life and to not have to spend all of their energy just surviving, just getting through the day, just putting enough food on the table. That becomes the question in my mind. And to start to get an answer to that question, I actually think we have to look backwards. We have to look backwards to our own development. Because let's be honest, in the 1700s, when the pioneers got here, there wasn't a grid. There weren't roads. There wasn't any of that. And the Industrial Revolution happened. You guys learned about the Industrial Revolution in history class. And while that happened, both here and in Europe, technologies were developed. Some really cool technologies were developed that are community scale, that are kind of the scale of like a little village, 30 or 40 families, 300 to 500 people really matters. that are still useful today, that still have applications. So what's up here is a water wheel. Water wheels have been around since Rome and Greece. They are great mechanical things. We'll talk about them more in a second, what you can do with them. But they're still useful. This right here, which you guys probably don't recognize, is a hydraulic ram pump. The ram pump can pump water uphill. No power source. There's no generator on it. You can actually mechanically pump water uphill. And this right here is a Pelton turbine. Ram pumps, by the way, were developed in the 1770s. Pelton turbine was patented, I think, in the 1800s by an American. And that turbine has actually been developed enough to the point today that you can produce electricity with that for a community. So let's talk a little bit about water wheels for a second. Like I said, they're really old technology. I want to talk a little bit for a second about context. So in Guatemala, they grow coffee. It's really different than that farmer story I told you about. They live in communities, they farm in cooperatives, and they grow a cash crop. They grow coffee. Okay? And we got into this business because early 1900s, a lot of foreigners, really mostly. In this case, in this particular farmer's case, a German moved over there and owned the land. And at least from my work with Germans, they're great, but they love their cutting edge technology. So what did this guy do? Well, he brought in a water wheel to help them drive. You can't see it super well, but this is actually driving the processing equipment. This is like a coffee driver, which after you pick the coffee, the beans, you peel them and you dry them out. So you could actually drive all of that with the water wheel. Now, they've replaced this for the time being with this little motor right here. But that motor and that fuel cost that community a lot of money. So the question became, can we fix this to still do this work? Will it make a difference? And so, from a mechanical point of view, do a little science really quick. It's all belts and pulleys. You guys covered any belts and pulleys and gears? No, I got all sophomores, so they did not cover any of that. You got one. All right, you got one guy. So, the big thing to know about water wheels is, will it make a difference? And so, from a mechanical point of view, do a little science really quick. It's all belts and pulleys. You guys covered any belts and pulleys and gears? No, I got all sophomores, so they did not cover any of that. You got one. All right, you got one guy. So, the big thing to know about water wheels is they've got big diameters. So you get a big mechanical advantage. When the water falls, it pushes, and there's a lot of torque on the shaft. All right? What that means is if you've got a smaller wheel somewhere else on that same shaft, the outside edge of that wheel can spin pretty quickly. It can spin quickly enough to spin this coffee dryer at a rate that if you get a fire or your heat source over here, you can dry out all the beans. You can actually get it all going. It's like a dryer in your house kind of. Same idea. So, here's one application. Here's a water wheel. Here's a thing we can do. It doesn't require power. It doesn't require a fuel source. That can help people make more money on their crops. They make more money on their crops and send their kids to school for another year. Things like that. All right. Let's do a little more science. We're going to talk about Pelton turbines. Pelton turbines refer to the shape of this little cup here. This is a Pelton cup. It's cool because you still use water to push it. But it's cool because the edges over here, the water comes in and hits the middle, and it gets split in half. And it gets turned around the other direction. And what happens is that you're trying to capture all the momentum of the water. Where did the water get all the momentum? Where did the water get all the energy? Water gets all the energy in these applications from being up high, right? It's all gravitational potential energy, MGH, mass times gravity times height, times how far it's going to come down that mountain. Okay? You don't even need a lot of flow to run this. You don't need a big river. You can do this with a little river. It's pretty cool. And what you do is divert the water over to a channel you build. You build kind of a reservoir so that you can get consistent flow out of it. It goes down to the turbine house. And it eventually gets piped in and it hits the wheel and it spins this turbine, right? The gravitational potential energy becomes kinetic energy. As the water comes downhill, it goes faster. And with that speed, it can spin this turbine, right? So, we've got this technology. It's pretty cool. You can run a generator on it. So it spins, anywhere from 800 to 1200 rotations per minute, depending on your application, your situation. And that turbine, the one up there, it's about 15 inches in diameter and produces about 8 kilowatts of electricity. That's enough electricity for 300 people in their houses. Everybody gets a light bulb, probably a couple light bulbs. You can run a radio. You can't run a refrigerator on it. You can't run something that kind of constantly consumes electricity like that. But that makes a difference. They can also run, like I said, all of their coffee processing equipment on it, which is a big deal. Because to hook up to the grid as it exists costs a lot of extra money, and doesn't mean they always have power when they need it. When there's big storms, that grid might not hold up. This smaller scale system, they control. So it holds up a little better. Alright. Last but not least, we've got ram pumps. Alright, who here has ever lived in a house with radiators? Tell me somebody's lived in a house with radiators. Alright. You heard the knocking? Sometimes a very loud knocking? Yeah? That's from a phenomenon called water hammer. It's bad in radiators. It's good in this application. What happens when you have water hammer is that there's air in the pipe. It's stuck between the water. And water, in most situations that you and I see it in, is not a compressible fluid, right? You can't squash water. It'll move. You can't squash it more. Air, you and I know, you can press on it. You get it contained, you can press on it. So what happens when there's water hammer is the air compresses and compresses until it gets down to a certain point where it's not going to compress anymore, and it pushes back. So in this pump, right, there's water coming from elsewhere. It's gaining velocity as it travels. So that's where its energy comes from. It's gaining velocity as it travels. It's entering the pump, it's passing this valve right here. When it gets fast enough, this valve closes. Alright, this valve closes, and this one over here opens, and some water goes by and compresses the air. Eventually that air, like I said, gets compressed too far, and it pushes back. When it pushes back, this valve closes, and the water gets shot uphill. Right? So, say your river in your community is down the hill over there, that's your best clean water source. Now, rather than having to walk down the hill every day and walk up it, you have a water source. You have running water. You can actually get it to a higher point and then, run pipes if you want to the whole community. So you have a version of running water. You have access. So, that's what a ram pump is. I'm going to see if the video link works because they're kind of fun to watch. They're really noisy. Wake everyone up. See if that's going to look. So you can't see, what happens inside the pump. But to give you a sense there, that cylinder, that pipe, is where the air is being compressed, where you have a pocket of air. That valve that's releasing extra water is that impulse valve that's waiting for the water to get fast enough. They're zooming in, they're showing you around. I don't know if he's going to show the other side, but I don't remember. That gives you a sense of what's going on. And the knocking sound is exactly what I talked about. That's the water hammer. That's the phenomenon. So, these are some really kind of old technologies that are useful. Once again, they're useful in certain contexts. You have to go and evaluate. You have to go look at the river and measure how far downhill it comes. Normally, if you're an engineer in the field, you do that with like a handheld GPS. You measure the height difference from up high to down low. You have to measure the flow. Does anyone want to take a shot at how we measure the flow in these little rivers? It's very hands-on. It's not very advanced. Right, so we can put something in the river, we can watch it, we can track how long it takes to travel a certain distance. Any other ideas? Yeah.
You tie knots in a rope and see in a certain amount of time how many knots go down the river.
That's also possible. In Guatemala, most often, I climbed in the river with a 5-gallon bucket, and someone timed how long it took to fill up. And I did it over and over again to get a sample size. I got in my boots in the river, and that's what you do. And that's, for the wide rivers, your knot idea, or watching an object, is the most effective, because it's too wide. We measure surface speed, and then we measure the depth to get the volume, because we end up caring about how much volume is there. If the river's small enough that it comes to a point and I can capture a lot of the flow, then I get in there with my bucket. It's not very advanced, but they aren't perfect efficiency systems. It works. That's the most important thing, right? It works. So, these are great systems when you have a community that are really involved and invested, and they work in places. But I gotta ask you something. You guys, if you're a farmer, do you know anything about any of those items up on my screen? Probably not, right? That circuit board, I mean, maybe it looks less daunting to you guys, it looks really daunting to me. So the only issue here becomes maintenance. Who's going to take care of it when it breaks? Who's going to take care of it when the community plugs in that refrigerator that I told you that turbine can't handle from a load plant? Right? So one of your most important jobs as an engineer, if you get into this kind of stuff, is actually your community engagement. It's actually talking to people and helping them understand how this technology works, what they're really going to be able to get out of it. Right? Having conversations, training somebody to fix it, or developing a business, and the business then installs it, they got to be reachable. You got to have a number that someone can actually call when it breaks. Because everything breaks eventually. I know you guys are going to be great engineers and design like perfect systems, but I haven't done that yet, so everything I've done breaks eventually. So there is one more level down can go. There are situations in which you don't have a community that's all organized. You have people that are really spread out. You have people with really different priorities, right? And this is normally, these projects are normally funded through grants, and you've got to have a community that's organized to get those kind of grants. So you go down a level. You go down to the level of the individual. And the most transformative technology out there right now for individuals in the developing world. What's he using? You guys see it?
Cell phone.
A cell phone. A little $20, they're mostly Nokia at this point, these guys are the leaders, don't ask me why, cell phone. It's waterproof, not perfectly, but you can drop it and pick it up and it'll still work. What do you guys think that farmer, what kind of information can he get with his cell phone that might be important to him?
Tweets.
Weather. Anything else? Speak up. Alright. He can buy stuff. Right? He can bank. Now, with microfinance, there are banks that function entirely. Now imagine you've never had a bank. All your money, any cash you have is like under your mattress, like literally. You can buy crop insurance. Your kid's sick. You can text someone some of their symptoms. They can tell you whether or not you've got to make that really costly trip to the hospital in town, which is really hard for you. Or whether you can wait for the mobile clinic around in 2 days. All right? That's kind of the difference with individual technologies. They empower one person or maybe a family of people, but that guy owns a cell phone. He can control exactly. Cell phones in the developing world are all pay as you go, and they don't charge by the minute, they charge by the second, because that's how closely they watch their minutes. If you guys watch your data plans, this is like the next level. All right? And he can control all of that because he's an individual, right? And he can be empowered by that. He can use that for his own business ends as he chooses. So it's a really interesting technology, and cell phones are kind of the cutting edge of this. And the other cool thing about cell phones is that they bypass all that infrastructure we talked about before. You still need towers, and cell companies are putting towers further and further out. But you don't need landlines. The developing world isn't going to have landlines. This building still has phones. I know they still ring. Okay? They're not ever going to have that because they don't need it. Well, there are other technologies in some ways that are like that I think we're going to start to see in the developing world. And that's what I'm really here to talk about more. Right? When I talk about decentralization, I'm talking about getting away from having to have a grid, which the community's technologies do, but these do even more. All right? Those objects up here on the right side are solar lanterns. All right? Really, really simple. We've got a photovoltaic cell, which is made up of a material that responds when it sees light, and you can actually put a bunch of cells together and produce current. That current charges a battery. That battery runs a light, a bulb, normally an LED. And then there's a diffuser. There's a piece of plastic. There's something to spread out the light. And that's it. I can tell you that this one on the bottom that looks like a light bulb, they're going to sell it for $2. All right? So that's really accessible. That's accessible even if your annual income is under $500. That's a big difference, right? That means that now you can study, you can do your homework after the sun goes down. Imagine if all of you could not do your homework after the sun goes down. How would you get your homework done? Right? So how would you get your homework done? How would you have time to learn everything that Mr. Lawrence demands that you learn before next Monday? You had to do all your work in the sunlight. This is what we're talking about, right? What if you had a business? What if you did embroidery? What if you had a business on the side? Because in the dry season, you can't grow so many crops. What if you had a business on the side? This is an extra hour, 2 hours a day that you can do work when you can't take care of your farm animals. That's that money you can save to, buy the next piece of land, to hire an extra laborer at harvest, to get in some more crops, make some more money. So these things all build upon themselves, right? And to be honest, most of these are not being produced in country, but they are developing groups of people who know how to fix them. Because that's a business in and of itself. If you know how to fix one, people are buying them, you've got your own business. So that's part of why these are really cool. All right, now we're going to talk about something else in your house that you don't think about too much, I don't imagine. How many of you cook? Ooh, we have cooks, great. And you guys probably have electric or gas stoves? Yeah. Gas is better? All right. So I was talking about how many hours a day you spend as a couple collecting firewood. And the more firewood everyone collects that lives close together, the further out you have to go to get it, the more time it takes you. So what this is like it's a high efficiency stove. Because most people just cook on they put their pot on 3 rocks or bricks or whatever they've got and they build a fire underneath. But it doesn't really direct or control the heat. So what this is there's a chamber in here, built like this, and you fill it up with firewood and it directs all the hot air. This is all insulated down here. This is pumice stone because it's cheap. It directs all the hot air to right underneath the stove surface. You're controlling the flow of energy. You're controlling the flow of heat to right underneath the stove so that you can cook with less fuel. There's less time you spend every day collecting firewood. But you're still able to cook. You're still able, this is in Guatemala again, and we did testing. And the major test is how long it takes to cook a pot of beans, because that takes forever, as I found out. But we had people cook on them. And they have standards too. You have to be able to effectively make a tortilla, which takes a certain amount of heat to get the outside to stick together right so it doesn't just stick to the hot surface. So, discerning consumers, no doubt, but this makes a difference. The other big difference this makes is the smoke in the home. One of the things from a health point of view that most affects people in the developing world is the amount of smoke they breathe in when they're cooking, particularly women and children. It's a huge problem. The problem solved by this chimney, it's just off in the edge of the background, by the chimney. Literally, it's a smokestack, and it means that your kitchen is not full of smoke every day, and you're not breathing in the particulates and the carbon monoxide. And that has a big impact on how often you get sick, asthma, anything like that. So, this is a really cool in-the-home technology. It's also for the individual. If that stove breaks, if there's something wrong with it, it's made out of things that are all readily available to get fixed. You can fix the chamber if you get some clay. You can repack the pumice stone. The only part that really comes from elsewhere is the plancha, that cooking surface. And those are what are used on all the stoves over there. They're very common. They're not hard to find. All right, so that's an important thing when I think about designing something like this. All right, so back out on the farm. We talked about hauling water. We talked about only having one growing season. So how do you get around that? Well, there's this really cool thing called a treadle pump. And it works using, it's human powered, you gotta get on there. Anyone need a workout? It's better than the elliptical, I think. And it uses suction. So you push down, and actually, you pull up, and the water comes up. You've dug essentially a little well, and the water comes up underneath this piston. All right, and then when you push down, there's a release behind the piston, and the water goes by and flows out. It's driven by foot. And it's not complicated to build. In fact, if anyone needs some kind of building practice project, I would bet that you could build one of these here with all of your knowledge. It's pretty simple. This one's made out of PVC. That's PVC, some wood. There's a connecting rope. It's not even a chain. The whole thing goes together. All right? And it's a pump. It means that you can grow an off-season garden. You can grow an off-season garden and grow some vegetables. You're selling when the prices are higher. You're selling when the prices are higher, you make more money, you have more money to buy food for your family, to send people to school, so on and so forth. All right, so this is a really impactful technology. I know it doesn't look particularly awesome, but to the farmers that have it, this is really awesome. So coming out of that, this is drip irrigation. This is one thing you can do. If you have a treadle pump or you have another water source, you fill it. Irrigation is not something, it's something that's been around for a long, long time, but it's not something that everyone knows how to do. And literally, to do drip irrigation, you just need a hose with a lot of little holes in it, right? this is education. One aspect of this is not just like taking them and handing them this thing and going here, but explaining what's possible, helping people see the possibilities. And that's kind of where the drip irrigation fits in. All right. Now I'm going to talk about up here is this push cart. This push cart is near and dear to my heart because I spent a year working on it. And I know you think push cart, you think really simple, all right? And let's have no doubt that the people in the developing world have carts. They have really good carts, especially in the cities. But in Tanzania, you don't see carts off-road. You don't see wheels, right? How much mechanical advantage do you have with a wheel? How much easier is it to roll your suitcase than to carry it? It's a lot easier, okay? Especially if your suitcase weighs a couple hundred pounds. So, how do we think about designing that cart? What do we care about, right? It's gotta meet the structural requirement. It's gotta be strong enough to carry all those jerry cans of water so you actually make fewer trips. It in and of itself has to hold up. It has to be durable. That wheel, so they use bike wheels on their carts in the cities and they get destroyed off-road. So that wheel has to hold up. It has to be fixable. Yeah. Where's it going to break? That cart, either the tubes will get bent on it or a bolt's going to snap. You can buy all the bolts in town, in the market town, or you can go see a welder and he'll just weld it solid to solve your problem. Okay, that cart's fixable. Now, how do we make it as cheap as you've got to make it to get to as many people as possible? The reason that you're interested in people buying your products, and they've done studies on this, and I don't understand all the methodology, but ownership is important. If I hand you a computer, and you don't owe me anything if it breaks, the odds that you drop it or you aren't quite as careful with it are actually higher. It's just the way we work as people, right? If you have to buy it, you work for 6 months and save your own money, and you buy that computer, you're going to be really careful with it. I'm going to bet. It's the same thing with a cart. But it's important that the price be low, that it be accessible. So, our target price was somewhere between $10 and $12. We ended up, I think, right around 20. All right, the biggest cost drivers in anything like this actually turns out to be the material. And there's a certain amount of material you need to actually form a cart structure. But we did other things like made it IKEA style. Okay, who's ever had to put together furniture from IKEA? Okay, so it's the greatest, right? But it's part of why it doesn't cost you as much money, because you're doing the assembly. Same thing with the carts. And to make the instruction booklet, just like IKEA, there are no words because most of my customers are illiterate. So they can't even read it. We won't even mention that there's a bunch of different languages they don't speak. All right. So let's tell you one last story. This is Fatuma. Fatuma is a farmer, just like the farmer I described to you at the beginning. Okay? She got one of our carts in our pilot. She decided to start an off-season garden with our cart. And it helped her save enough money to send her grandson to school. And she was so thankful to us for the cart that when we came back to visit 4 months later, she tried to give us her chicken. Now, I know, well, A, my boss is a vegetarian, so he really did not want the chicken. Alright? But, in all seriousness, that's a statement. This woman didn't even happen to own a cow, so chickens are the only livestock she's got. But that's how much of a difference this really simple thing made. And it's because it changes the way people spend their energy. If people don't spend all their energy just getting by, they got time to do other things, to pursue other interests, right? So, part of why I think the these technologies matter, these individual scale, these solar lanterns, these cars, they really matter is because they empower people to take control of their lives. They give a little bit of wiggle room. They give a little bit of extra money, a little bit of extra time to pursue a business, to come up with another idea for how to make more money or how to do something differently, right? It gives them time to organize their communities in ways that might lead them to be able to implement those more complicated technologies that I mentioned earlier. Okay? It's a gateway for future generations. Most of the people we talk to on the ground with extra money will send their kids to school for longer. That is what they all want to do. They all want to do what your parents did by sending you here. They want their kids to have something better. They will send them to school. Okay? Last but not least, it leads to entrepreneurial activity, it leads to their own design. Suddenly, they have time to think and be creative. Now, this object and this object do the same thing. You don't quite believe me, do you? They're both arc welders. Okay? Right? That blows your mind. But it works. I've seen them. They're not the safest thing in the world, I will tell you that. But it works. And now somebody's got a side business. Somebody has designed that. Somebody has extra income. But that only comes when you have time and some money to do something different. So in my mind, let's design all kinds of things for all stages of development. But if we're talking about reaching the billion people that really, if you average out their income over their whole year, because they don't get $1 a day, that's not how it works. If you average it out over the whole year, about $1 a day, you're talking about reaching this really discerning consumer. Okay? They're really picky with their money. But that can be a good thing. That will challenge you to make a really effective design. Because you're going to go sell it. You're going to go pitch it. Alright? Let's talk about human-centered design. And this isn't something I got into too much, but this is a particular design methodology. It's particularly used by industrial designers, but engineers are getting into it more and more. And it's about talking to people. It's about observing people, obviously with their permission. Before we ever started making a cart, we went around and interviewed 20 plus farmers. And we found out exactly what their day was like. We found out what was hard to do and what was easy to do. Okay? We went into the cities and we talked to the guys that had carts, and we learned all about their carts and how they use their carts and why they use their carts and what they expect their carts to be able to do. That's the only way to design effectively. You can assume nothing. Assume nothing. Get very, very humble. Get very, very small. You are going to have great outside perspective. You are going to have seen technologies, have learned things that they haven't. And that is going to enable you to think outside the box. And that's really cool, and that's really great. But the first thing you have to do is to understand that you don't know what their lives are like. It's the most important thing you do. And then, wide variety of contexts. I talked to you about Guatemala. I talked to you about those cooperatives. And I talked to you about Africa, and these individual farmers. And everyone's story, and everyone's history in each region is different. And some products are going to have great carryover. Those solar lanterns have all kinds of applications, all kinds of places. But I know one that's being designed for fishermen, specifically in India, that has to be waterproof and it has to do other things. So you really have to understand your context, and you have to understand some history. If you don't understand the history of these places and what and what people have been through, you can miss something important. Last but not least, I know I've said it a couple times, but I was taught to really bring it home. All right, this durability versus repairability. You want to make a product that's going to last a long time, but you want to keep the price low. Normally, you pay that price in materials, in thicknesses, in components, and something like that. Make sure whatever you can't pick the very best of is something that they can replace. And that has to go into how you think about design. Because you want there to be access. You want to reach all of these people. You want to reach as many as you can. Not every technology will reach everyone. The question really becomes, How do we help people get to where they want to be? Are we prepared to truly listen and empathize and think ourselves into what it's like to be them? And then how can we help them use their own energy to create the lives they seek, to get beyond the roadblocks they see? How do we get beyond the grid and what we know? So, that's the overview, guys. It's the short version. But, yeah. Questions, I'll answer them, or try.
You said that in Africa, they can buy cell phones for $20. How much do they charge for talk if texting though?
It varies, and I don't even know what current rates are. You can buy, I think the smallest amount of credit you can buy is just over $1. In Tanzania, it's about 2,000 shillings, which if the exchange rates are the same, it's about $1.25. And how much you talk and text. The companies there are really good at, like, they have special days, and if you call someone with the same SIM card, it costs you less money than if you call someone with a different company. But you can probably make, for that amount of money, I'd say you can make between 5 and 10 text messages at least. I don't know how many minutes that adds up to. That really depends on what you call. Anybody else?